Yeah, we had Bernie Sanders on, and he was saying that he said Pete Seeger was one of his favorite musicians.
Scoot McNairy could play Bernie Sanders in a biopic.
Oh, he could.
Right?
Yeah.
Totally could. Bernie hasn't aged.
Nah, Bernie still looks the same. He's the best, dude.
He's looked the same in the last... Yeah. He's like a real folk hero.
It's a great point.
Yeah, Bernie is...
He is a folk hero.
Yeah, he's folk music. Mitchell Lama. You know about Mitchell Lama?
Yeah, the restaurant stars or whatever?
No. Mitchell Lama is like... There's like to my understanding, there's two versions of like good arts housing here. You got Section 8. That means you're paying like under $800. Mitchell Lama. Yep.
Oh, that damn Mitchell Lama, brother.
Absolutely.
Oh.
That's me, baby. Moderate.
Mitchell Lama program provides affordable rental and cooperative housing to moderate and middle income families.
Where are my Dune heads out there? Actor Timothee Chalamet, Lisan Al-Gaib, was talking to Theo Von. They got pretty fan bro, pretty stan over Bernie Sanders. I can get with that. But Krystal Ball talks about it on Breaking Points. Let's take a listen.
Also give you a little taste there of them busting out the housing policy discourse.
Yes, Mitchell Lama, which apparently Chalamet, I think he was raised in. That's what he talked about there on the podcast. I don't know. I've seen this passed around, this whole like, so I saw somebody respond to this and they're like, this shows that Bernie Sanders would have won. And I was like, because Chalamet likes Bernie Sanders? I mean, Kamala had plenty of celebrity endorsements last time I checked.
Yeah.
Also, if I remember, there were a bunch of celebs who backed Bernie in 2020 or even in 2016. What's her name? The supermodel, Ratajkowski, Emily Ratajkowski, if I recall. There were definitely a few others. I think Cardi B was in there as well.
I think it wasn't so much about obviously, it's too simplistic to be like, this proves Bernie would have won.
Okay,
but
I'm just saying, I saw a very viral. Chalamet backed Bernie.
I don't think it's about Chalamet backing him. I think it's about Bernie was capable of going on the Theo Von podcast and Theo Von being like, I love this guy.
Yeah,
this guy's great. He's a folk hero.
2016 too. He still didn't win the.
Yeah, he got screwed.
Yeah,
and it was. But
it's not the only reason.
But we're also talking about a general election versus a primary election. Obviously, one of the big learnings out of this election was that like bro podcast comedy, that whole sphere turned out to be really important. Mm-hmm. And there's a whole, I think, important conversation about. Number one, Kamala, I never bought that she should have gone on Rogan because I just don't think she would have done well there. Mm-hmm. So there's number one, the problem of just like having a candidate that you would want to see in any one of these venues. But it recalls the fact that back in 2016 and in 2020, but I think especially in 2016, Bernie had huge support among the bros, among the Latinos, among the working class. All the groups that have fled the Democratic Party the fastest were his strongest bases of support. And he was smeared for that. He was the whole Bernie bro was meant as a smear, and they were derided as being toxic, et cetera, et cetera. Now, it was always inaccurate to paint his support as being completely male. In fact, there were, young women, young men overwhelmingly supported Bernie Sanders both in 2016 and 2020. But I think it was more the point here was that he's someone who Joe Rogan did support, that this ecosystem did support, even though his politics are obviously very different from Trump. He taps into that similar desire for something different and a challenge to the establishment. Now, I think Trump's challenge to the establishment is fake, blah, blah, blah. But there's no doubt that that is how he is perceived and has successfully positioned himself as being this sort of anti-system politician. And Bernie Sanders fits that same model. And
now, just to clarify that a little bit more, I think that both Trump and Sanders have been saying the system needs to be fixed and it's broken. It's not working for you, right? Sanders has been saying it his entire 40-year career in politics, and he has actual common sense, plans for how to address that and how to fix it based on times in our own history when it has worked, etc. Sound fiscal economic policy. Trump is just a con man. He's just a huckster that was smart enough to recognize that there's this huge dissatisfaction in this country. And he says, on the surface, similar things to, we're going to make it good for the working class. We're going to fix it for you. Only I can fix it. But there's no plan.
If Democrats are losing the bros, here you got a couple of bros who are like, oh my God, I love that guy. He's a folk hero.
Yeah.
And another thing I'll say is that not only is there no plan from Trump, he doesn't really care. Bernie genuinely would like to see America have a little more equal playing field, a little more distribution of the wealth. Not in a communist way, but just ironically in a way that I think most people who want to make America great again imagine America having been great, when you could own a car and support a family of 4 and own a house on a single job, and that, you'd had reasonable health care and benefits through that job. And on the weekends, you could grill some burgers and relax and have some beer with your buddies and go on vacation with your family for a couple of weeks, and that was all possible without having to worry about a single medical crisis completely bankrupting your entire family and your next generation the way that it is now, right? So, I mean, if that's when America was great again, leaving any racist ideologies out of it, that's actually the kind of America that Bernie's policies would move us back towards, instead of the oligarchy, which you could see in any of his videos or my other videos, or it's all over the place, right?
Yeah, I still am not so sure I buy that analysis, just because with Bernie, it was fundamentally irreconcilable to the Democratic coalition. Like, you had rich white people who was obsessed with race in 2016, who, yes, smeared Bernie. Look, I agree, the Bernie Sanders bro thing was bullshit, but people ate it up, right? Well, that was in the midst of Russiagate and all this other crap.
He wasn't.
They drove him out of the coalition because they hate them.
So if you looked at the polling, 2020, we covered this extensively. In every primary, including the ones that he lost, got blown out by Joe Biden, like in Mississippi. Mm-hmm. If you ask people about his policy platform and about their personal feelings about him, he won on the policies. He won on his approval rating. People were convinced he couldn't beat Trump. Mm-hmm. They're convinced about that in 2016. They're convinced about that in 2020. We have seen how that ultimately worked out. But they bought into the narrative that was fed to them by MSNBC and other places that you can't vote. You may like this guy, but you can't vote for him because he's not the right person to go up against Donald Trump. Now, listen, ultimately, we'll never know what would have happened if he had been the nominee and he, in 2016 or in 2020, and how that ultimately would have gone. But I would submit, based on history, based on, the fact that he's sort of has a modern version of the New Deal left populist approach to combating what you wouldn't, but I would characterize as a fascist appeal. That is what has been successful in the past. And I think given the groups that he had the most traction with, there's certainly a good case to be made that he would have been a much better candidate to go up directly against Trumpism than this lukewarm Dover milquetoast neoliberalism that just promises to protect a system that people hate and is fundamentally unjust.
Yeah, the problem with that is that Bernie himself then decides to go along with it. He goes into Russiagate. He goes into the wokeism. He adopts a lot of this stuff into his campaign in 2020. He shifts a lot of his own positions, moves away from what made him so independent on war, on so much stuff, right? He's been a huge disappointment, if anything, to a lot of the people who originally joined his movement in 2016. And so I just think that shows where the power lies in the Democratic Party. It's with these DEI academics. Now, maybe it's broken now. I don't think so, though, because what I think is that now the only people who remain committed Democrats in this country are rich white people. That's basically it. The good news for you is that you can convince these people of anything as long as they think they'll win.
There's plenty of rich white people that vote Republican too, my friend.
That's all they really care about. But which direction of all of that will come from the pages of the New York Times, the pages of people like John Favreau and others for what they think and continue to be told. And you got to give people some agency. Sure, it's MSNBC's fault, but they trusted them in the first place, right? They're the ones who bought their stuff and decided to vote against them. So at a certain point, it's not MSNBC's fault. They have a bunch of people who are brainwashed enough or whatever to be able to want to listen to them.
But who's doing the brainwashing here? I mean, I think you had a lot of earnest people who were deeply troubled by the threat that Trump posed, and were looking for answers. And this was the network that they had been sort of primed to trust and think that was not going to lead them astray. And I do think that there's a moment now of reckoning among that liberal base, which is fleeing MSNBC in droves, which has lost a lot of trust in the Washington Post, is another place that saw a huge subscriber exodus. You see a huge surge in a lot of like left populist, me and my husband's in particular, online, where I think there are a lot of liberal refugees who were like, this did not work. Like this line that we were fed about how we had to abandon caring about any issues in order to defeat Trump, like this was bullshit. This failed. And we were led astray and we were lied to and we were manipulated. So there is an opening there. Now, I have been very upfront about, I think it's much more likely the Democratic Party just does like a Trumpism light, that they pull a Bill Clinton, that they, sort of, rather than having a direct rebuttal to Trumpism, instead they go in the direction of we'll just like be a kinder, gentler version of that. I think that's the most likely outcome, but there is a possibility here that didn't exist before. Another thing that I would say is, it would be a mistake to think that these political coalitions, and this is the mistake Democrats made in the past, are immovable and unchangeable and locked into place. There is a lot of, I think one thing we've learned is people are continually adjusting, evaluating, shifting loyalties. Even in this election, it's not like Trump didn't even get 50% of the vote, and plenty of swing state Democrats did win. You saw candidates who outperformed, like Sherrod Brown, he loses, but he outperformed the top of the ticket by 12 points. You see candidates who are able to stitch together a somewhat different coalition, hold on to more of that historic Democratic working class base.
That's an excellent point. It looked like a more catastrophic loss this past election than it actually was on paper. And I am not downplaying the dire nature of the situation we find ourselves in with him returning to the White House. But you look at that red-blue map, and it just looks like, Reagan winning re-election in this incredible, unprecedented landslide. The race was actually pretty close state by state. The fact that he won all of the swing states, is a devastating. People talk about this mandate. Half of the country didn't want him to be president, and it was a pretty narrow margin if you look at it point by point. So that's another argument just not to completely give up hope. But Krystal Ball makes a lot of good points here. I would love to know what you think in the comments.